we've been talking about the Malaysian solution this morning. In fact, we've been talking about it all week. The government admitted that children are going to be part of the swap. First of all, Kerry Chikarovski, what do you make of this yet-to-be-signed deal? I mean, did the details of the deal become revealed too early, or is this really a problem with what we're trying to do?
Look, I feel really sorry for Chris Bowen over this whole issue, because Chris is a really decent person, and he looks, I think, pretty uncomfortable with what he's had to go out and talk about in relation to this issue, particularly in relation to the unaccompanied children. I know what they're trying to say. They're trying to look tough. They're trying to look, we're taking control here. But I do think that there's real concern about it. And the revelations that Malaysia, for example, don't want references to human rights in the agreement must be causing concern across the political landscape. I think everybody is concerned about what's going to happen to these children and these pregnant women. And then to hear stories about people being caned and attacked in that way in these camps, it's got to be a matter of real concern for everyone involved in politics.
Rebecca Huntley?
We should worry as much about refugees as we do about cattle.
Well, we'll be talking
about that. But I think the larger issue is the Labor Party for 10 years, really since Tampa, have been trying to articulate a unique position on asylum seekers. And it's almost like they're trying to find another country to get them off the hook. One moment it's East Timor, the next moment it's Malaysia.
It's not solving a problem, is it? It's just shifting it.
The bigger problem is, what is the Labor Party's position on refugees? Is it distinct from the opposition's? Is it humane? And is it well articulated?
Can I ask you those questions?
I have absolutely no idea, and this is from somebody who was in the Labor Party for 10 years. It's an enormous problem, and it's in fact bigger than the problem of actual refugees in Australia. It goes to the heart of what the Labor Party believes and how it articulates what it believes.
And look, I would have thought, I know that they have been absolutely desperate to distance themselves from the Nauru solution, but really, at least if they were in Nauru, if they were in a country in which we were overseeing the camp, you'd have some better confidence that people were getting decent food, decent medical care, education, all those sorts of things. And I kind of think at this stage they would really be better off biting the bullet and saying, we got it wrong, and if we're not going to have onshore processing, let's at least have offshore processing in a camp that we control.
But they've lost the debate. They've lost control of the debate.
And why would the government sanction something that obviously has been a key plank of the opposition's platform? I mean, what would that open
they're actually not getting any goodwill by the solutions that they keep offering. I mean, at the moment, they're actually not in a position where they can turn to the Australian community and say, this is a better solution, because no one actually believes that's right.
And the problem, of course, if they back away from this, what's the alternative? And now they've zigzagged over the last 10 years in relation to this, and it's really muddied the waters. And I've got to say, from a point of view of our research, people do not understand where the Labor Party stand on this. They're very clear about what Tony Abbott feels about it, but they're not clear. And so I actually don't know the way forward after something like this.
Does your research say that people like the idea of getting asylum seekers off Australian land? What does that tell you? Our
research shows that people are generally worried about migrants of all kinds coming here, but it also shows that people don't understand how many people come, how they're processed, and our problems compared to the rest of the world. I mean, in the way that some people talk about asylum seekers in our groups, you'd think we'd have the problems of Pakistan, and we don't. So the reality is there isn't a lot of community understanding of either the international laws or what we do. So the government, in terms of polling people and thinking this is what people say and we need to fashion our policy response in relation to that, is just a kind of ridiculous loop, in my view.
Okay. Well, in the past week, there's been more evidence that mobile phone usage can cause cancer. But just a week before that, another report linking red meat and cured meat, eating it anyway, links it to bowel cancer, and that hardly raised a mention. First of all, I wonder, this isn't the first mobile phone report that's come out linking the use of phones to cancer. But still, it seems to be everyone's saying, still go ahead and use mobile phones. Why don't people take these reports seriously?
Well, I think the thing is that, what we find in our research is people are inundated with health warnings and health information. And often it's through the media, and it's a very synthesised view of complex scientific information. As we know, any kind of scientific report as Kerry would know, has a lot of caveats and qualifications. That gets narrowed down. And the response that a lot of people say is that, look, everything probably causes cancer. There are some things we're actually sure that cause cancer and other things we're not sure. The other thing, how can we avoid mobile phones? How can we, most of us, the idea of avoiding mobile phones, coffee and red meat, what would we do? So the problem, I think, about this, both about the media reporting but also potentially about how the scientific community manage it, is that people just go too much information and I'm just going to try and do the best thing I possibly, avoid cigarette smoking and, gargling with chemicals, every day and then see what happens.
Well, I've gone and bought the earpiece. I've decided that if Charlie Teo is out there saying, look, really use it hands-free or use an earpiece, and Charlie does more operations on brain tumours, I think, than any other surgeon in the country. So I've gone and bought the earpiece. Look, I think there is a bit of information overload. I do think people say, oh my God, what can we do to enjoy ourselves? So I think people are a little bit sceptical sometimes when they hear yet another warning about yet another thing. But I think particularly in relation to the mobile phones, it's not that hard to be cautious. I think it's not that hard to take those precautionary measures, and so I'm encouraging my children to do it. I want them to be around for a long time. They use their phones. But the thing which I find fascinating is that the kids now text much more than they speak on the phone anyway. Thank God that texting is cheaper. So, but I do think people are just saying, look, I want my glass of red wine. I want to have a steak. I want to be able to communicate with my friends. I'm going to die at some stage. I suppose if I can minimise some of the risk, maybe. But I'm not going to stop doing those things because, at the end of the day, you are going to die of something.
Do you think there are some issues, for example, some cancers like breast cancer receive a lot of publicity in the media? Things like bowel cancer, prostate cancer, you could argue, don't have such a good public image in terms of their visibility.
Well, I know a little bit about the prostate cancer because I used to, very many years ago, I was actually patron of the Prostate Cancer Foundation. And the problem with some of those things is that there is a debate within the medical community about, for example, the effectiveness of universal screening for men for prostate. The reason I think that breast cancer does so well is that there's quite a good body of research which says universal screening is a very good thing for plus 50s. So there is actually agreement within the medical community. I think when the medical community come together, and it's like a lot of these things, you get different views about what's good and what isn't. When the medical community come together about a program of activity, it gets endorsed, and then governments endorse it, and then it becomes community accepted. And I think that's why, for example, the breast cancer has done so well.
Okay. Well, a little earlier we touched on the animal issue, but let's speak about animal cruelty more fully and what happens when we send animals offshore. First, let's hear from Lynn White, who shot some of the footage in the Indonesian abattoirs, making headlines this week.
They will, without hesitation, supply animals to be brutally treated and then in Indonesia even go so far as to facilitate it. This is not a trade worthy of government support. Last night, Australians heard that one particular Australian cattle was tortured over a 25-minute period. After its leg was broken, it was eye gouged consistently, it was kicked in the head, it had its tail broken, it even had water hosed up its nose in a facility that only a month earlier had been visited by Meat and Livestock Australia representatives and deemed acceptable for Australian cattle to be processed through.
Lynn White there from Animals Australia. Rebecca Huntley, first of all, your view on live exports. I mean, we knowingly send animals, a lot of different animals overseas. Does our moral obligation to them, in a sense, end as soon as they're on the boat?
Yeah, look, I didn't watch the Four Corners show, but I remember there was a similar debate about export of sheep a number of years ago as well. And so, I mean, look, I actually don't know the intricacies of how stopping live exports would impact on farmers in Australia. But I do know that there's a real problem. We're very distant from the way in which our food is produced.
We are, even though we're quite an agricultural society compared to the UK, for example.
And I remember when Jamie Oliver on one of his shows killed a chicken on television, and he got an enormous amount of protest. How dare you kill a chicken on television? These are people who eat chicken. And you think, well, how do you think these animals get to us? So I think there's something to be said. If we can, I mean, I think that definitely needs to be inquiry about live export and the impact that stopping it would have on industry. But I think more importantly, we need to educate people. I mean, meat doesn't just arrive on a styrofoam tray. How is it produced? in what kind of conditions, and how does this impact just our whole connection to nature? It's a big issue.
Isn't the reality these days that most of our meat and chicken and eggs, everything's produced behind walls because obviously intensive farming practices are something that would shock most people? I mean, is this the problem with the way we produce food, and can we afford to produce it any other way? Kerry Chikarovski.
Well, look, can I just comment on the export stuff first? My concern about us withdrawing from that market, forget about any economic consequences for the industry, we then would have no moral right or legal ability to actually go into those facilities in Indonesia and work with them to improve standards. I have no doubt that other live export producing countries around the world would continue to do that. Now, do we believe that those countries are going to get so outraged that they will go and insist on those standards? I don't know the answer to that. But if we are not in that market, then we have no right, absolutely no right, to insist on an improvement in those animal welfare standards. And I think that our greater opportunity here is to actually jump up and down and say, we won't be exporting our cattle to you unless you improve those standards. So I think we have an opportunity here to actually assist in animal welfare. I know it's horrendous. I didn't see the program, and like you, I'm sure the images were terrible.
It's even upsetting listening to Lynn.
Well, it is, and it's terrible to hear what they do. But if we withdraw, who's going to actually work with the Indonesian authorities to make sure that things improve? So I actually think that there is an opportunity, but more importantly, an obligation on us to work with those facilities to improve animal welfare standards in those countries. And I know by saying, well, if we just withdraw, then we'll stop the cruelty to the animals, our animals. I don't believe that will stop the worldwide export market. I just don't think it'll work that way. So I think we can actually move and make us a very positive contribution. Now, as to the other more general issue, look, I think that people probably don't understand how food is produced. I mean, I just think that people, they sit back and they go, okay, I go to the supermarket and I buy my eggs and my meat and what have you. Now, I'm not entirely sure what sort of educational process you'd like to introduce, because have you been to an abattoir?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, and it's kind of, I went to one and they showed me every part of it except the actual slaughter. They decided I didn't need to see the slaughter. And you go along and you think, well, do I really want to see those animals slaughtered? No, I don't. But I do know that I want to eat. So, provided you can have given the guarantees as a consumer that in this country they're treated humanely, then I think I'm not entirely sure I want to see that footage on TV.
There's also the point that even sort of backyard farming, if you like, the more what's seen as a more humane way to slaughter animals, you bring them up and you take them to the slaughterhouse yourself, still involves the death of an animal.
Oh, yeah.
So there's going to be people who say, nothing will go far enough except becoming vegetarians.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, and the reality is that to actually turn the whole of the world into a vegetarian community is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. People, for a whole lot of reasons, health reasons, other health reasons, people will say you need to have your meat for your iron and all those sorts of things.
I don't necessarily think we should take groups of kindergarten children into abattoirs, but we do need to educate ourselves more about the process in which animals are produced for us to eat, and we need to make sure that that's as humane and healthy as possible and well regulated as possible. We need to ask questions about the way in which it comes to us, and it's not just about the safety of those animals, or not the safety, they're basically the welfare of them. It's also about, if you kill an animal over 25 minutes, there's all kinds of disgusting things that happen that can get into the meat. If you've read any of the stuff that's happened in America and the abattoirs there, you'll know that. So this idea that animal cruelty and how we treat animals is somehow separate from our own welfare, our own health, is not true.
Okay, well, we might leave it there. Rebecca Huntley, Kerry Chikarovski, thanks so much for joining the discussion this morning.